So I will talk a little about some of the tools that AWS has available to you and some of the observations that we've made around skills in the marketplace. Arden will talk about, will provide you with a mental model for how you might implement some of these tools and some ways that you can think about using training as a way to transform the culture within your organization. And Paul's going to talk about the National Australia Bank story. So what happened when the bank implemented some of these tools and these mental models and ways of thinking, and what sort of outcomes that they saw when they did that. So developing skills is something that's it's a really important topic to AWS because you're telling us that it's important to you. And as the adoption of cloud technology continues to accelerate at a rapid rate, and at AWS we're just getting started, it's causing a gap in the market between the people available in the market with the right cloud skills and the demand for those skills. And I know that whenever I go and talk to my customers, I'm having a conversation about three things. One of the things is the challenges that they find or the concerns they have that the people within their organization don't have the right skills to help them meet their organizational objectives. And the second thing is that when they go out to market to try to hire these skills, they're just not there. The data backs that up. We're seeing 65% of IT business decision leaders saying that they find it a challenge to hire talent into their organization. One of the reasons might be, for example, job postings for AWS skills alone has increased by 600% since 2012. So this is a real challenge that a lot of our customers are facing. There's a lot of competition for this type of technology in the market. The other thing that I'm talking to my customers about as well often is that not only is it a challenge to hire the talent, but the role of IT itself is changing. So what does that mean? That means that technologists need to be able to do what they've always done. They need to be able to keep the lights on. They need to be able to manage legacy infrastructure and technology. But they also now need to be ambidextrous. They need to be able to partner with business. They need to be builders and innovators. And we really need to get that, they really need to be able to work together with business leaders to make that happen. So what can we do about that? When I'm having these conversations with my customers, one of the first things that we talk about is to help to get started is to think about bridging the gap between business and technology by training really broadly across your organization. Help everybody to start speaking the same language. Paul is going to talk about later about how the National Australia Bank approached doing this. We want to start to bridge that gap between business and technology. We want people to start understanding the fundamentals of how technology can help to accelerate you towards your business outcomes. And research confirms that this is an effective approach. Comprehensively trained organizations are 80% faster to adopt cloud. They're 2.7 times more likely to jumpstart innovation. They are 4.4 times more likely to overcome operational and performance concerns. So what does comprehensively trained mean? We think about that as providing people with multiple opportunities to learn. So we try to think about that as creating a sense of that we're in this together. We're on a journey together. Bring the people along with you that you have with you on the journey with you and provide them with lots of different opportunities to learn. People learn in different ways. Some people like to learn by studying themselves. Some people like to sit in a classroom with an expert. There's all sorts of different ways that people like to learn. So just a couple of the tools that we have at AWS, we try to meet this need for different learners. We have a really robust digital training platform with a library of over 350 courses, which are all free. And we partner with some organizations like edX and Coursera who have worked with us to create some training specifically for developers. We have classroom training, so we have a team of experts we can send out to you who can help you to deliver deep tech skills really rapidly in a classroom, get hands-on experience in a lab environment. And the other thing that we offer is AWS certification as well. This is a fantastic way to validate the skills that you have, or have the people validate their skills as well. It's also a really good way to help celebrate and recognise people as well. Paul will talk through some examples of how the National Australia Bank have done that too. So I'm going to hand over now to Arden Packeer, who will provide you with the mental model from AWS for how training can really help to accelerate a cultural transformation in your organisation too.
Awesome.
Thanks, man.
All right. So at AWS, we believe training is a crucial component of your organizational transformation. So Elly talked a little bit about the ambidextrous nature of especially FSI, where you have to focus not only on keeping the lights on, but also on innovating, on building. There's a great quote by Peter Drucker: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Now, what does that mean? Well, has anyone here heard of the 10x engineer before? A couple of people? Well, the idea of a 10x engineer, these individuals, they work 10 times faster than a normal engineer. So they are multi-talented, they are able to deliver products and services 10 times faster. Now, these individuals are really, really rare in the marketplace. It's very hard to find them, and companies create entire strategies around these key individuals. But what we've found is that if we take a 10x type engineer and put them in a culture that doesn't support that innovation, that is a wasted resource. And so what we want to do is we want to build a training and learning culture that allows these individuals to flourish. Now, has anyone ever heard of John Boyd before? What we did when we talked about cultural transformation, especially inside of NAB, is we wanted to give them a mental model around how to think about organizational transformation and how training fits into that. Now, it's a really great story, and if you haven't heard this before, Boyd was a fighter pilot, and you're probably thinking, well, Arden, what has a fighter pilot got to do with training and cultural transformation? Well, he was flying the F-86s at the time, and these F-86s were up against the MiGs. And the MiGs had better firepower, better range, better weaponry, better just about everything. But these F-86s would win 10-1 against these MiGs. And being analytical, he looked at this and said, why is this so? There's something about either our planes or the way in which we're operating that's allowing us to win. And so he did some analysis, and what it turned out was there was two things that caused these planes to win. One, the F-86s had a wider field of canopy, so it allowed a pilot to see more. He could look around. And they had hydraulics on the controller, so it allowed a pilot to react faster. And he came up with this theory called the OODA loop. He said he noticed that as a pilot, what they were doing, what the pilots in the F-86s were doing, they could look around, scan the environment, make a change. Scan the environment, make a change. They could iterate really, really quickly. And he came up with this theory called the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, act. And he said, whoever goes through this loop the fastest wins. That's why we're winning. And he looked at how the military at the time was structured. And the military at the time, their operating model was a very centralized kind of command and control type operating model. So you had a command and control that gave an order, and you essentially had soldiers or developers, down the bottom there that executed. They were automatons. But what he noticed was that creates a lag in what you observe and how you orient yourself. And he said, that devolves into what's called attrition warfare. Whoever's got the biggest guns wins. And he said, we're doing this wrong because there's that lag between what you observe and how you orient yourself. We need to shorten that loop. So he came up with a theory called maneuver warfare. And you can see this today. If you ever see planes flying in formation, you might see 4 of them flying in a row. And one of them will say, tumbleweeds east side, which means I don't have any situational awareness over there. I don't have any data. I don't see an enemy. And another pilot might say 2 o'clock high, which means I see an enemy over there. And the current leader will say press, which means that, okay, you've got an enemy, you've got the data, so you're now in charge. We're going to put the authority where the data is. And he changed the face of how the military operated. Command and control no longer gave direct orders. They gave situational awareness. They gave the field situational awareness, and they gave a mission to the soldiers. And it was up to them on how they executed that. So what has this got to do with cloud and organizational transformation and training? Well, what we're seeing is that there are 3 operating models emerging, and we see this quite a lot. We see 3 operating models: a centralized operating model, a decentralized operating model, and a distributed operating model. So we often see centralized operating models in FSI and when people are first starting out their journey, and they'll build a big cloud center of excellence. The opposite of that might be a distributed operating model, and this is what we often see in things like startups, where lots and lots of small teams acting independently. But we're seeing another model emerging, and this is a model that NAB have embraced, where there's a decentralized model, where there's a middle ground, where there's some level of centralization. So it's usually around security, logging, monitoring, and it's about empowering the developers, pushing authority to where the developers are. And so what we see is that, how do we do this? How do we do this safely? How do we move from, you might have a centralized operating model today. How do we move to a decentralized operating model? How do we empower our developers? Now, this diagram here comes from a book called Turn the Ship Around by Captain David Marquet, another military story. He looked at how they could transform the culture of a submarine. And he said that if we're going to push authority to where the information is, not push information to the authority, but push authority to the developers or sailors in this particular case, we need 2 pillars. We need a pillar of competence and a pillar of clarity. And the story goes like this. So if you're a captain of a submarine, you spend a year learning everything there is to know about a submarine before you step foot on that submarine. And what happened with Captain Marquet was that he got placed on a submarine that he knew nothing about. The existing captain retired, and he got placed on this ship. And he tells the story of giving an order. He said, ahead 2/3 on this submarine. And he turned to his XO, and his XO said, Captain, ahead 2/3. And the sailor, the guy who had the data on the console there, sort of stood there frozen. And he said, hey, I gave an order. What's happening here? And the sailor turned to him and said, Captain, on this ship, there is no 2/3. So he quickly realized he shouldn't really have the authority because he didn't have the data. So he got his XOs in a room, and they said, what are we going to do about this? And they said, well, you're just going to have to learn the ship. And he said, well, what does that mean? Does that mean in a year's time we'll be safe? That's not going to fly. So he created a mechanism, and he called this mechanism intent-based leadership. He said, look, you guys know how to run this ship, but we're on a submarine. We've got to do this safely. I'm going to divest authority to you, but only on 2 conditions. If you can answer these 2 questions. Is it safe, and is it the right thing to do? Is it safe is a question of competence. What he's really asking is, do you want to know what this little knob over here means? Have you been trained? Are you certified? Is it the right thing to do? What he's really asking you is, do you have clarity? Do you understand the mission? Do you understand what we're trying to achieve? Do you have situational awareness? If you can answer those 2 questions, I can divest authority to you. Now, if you imagine a graph with one axis down the bottom being a measurement of competence and clarity. So how much training have you done in your organization? How much competence have you built in your organization? And another measurement of clarity, how much situational awareness do you have? And the other axis is control, or how much authority do you divest to your developers? What we're seeing is that, imagine this. You train everyone in your organization. You give them competence. What Elly talked about of comprehensively training your organization. You build clarity. You build mechanisms for giving developers situational awareness, visibility, logging, monitoring, etc. But then you don't give them control. You don't give them authority. You don't let them do things. What do you think happens? Frustration. Conversely, if you give control without building competence and clarity, what do you think happens then? You just let developers run wild? Well, then you end up in chaos. So what we think, and this is what we try to do inside of NAB, was that you should give control commensurate with the amount, or proportional to the amount of competence and clarity that you build. It's like a little step ladder. And so we think that this is where kind of the operating models fit in, right? This centralized operating model, a decentralized operating model, that nice middle ground, that's what we're trying to aim for there, to do this safely. And what we wanted to do, especially at the National Australia Bank, was build mechanisms for both competence and clarity. So one of the mechanisms for clarity, you might consider building, we've talked about this earlier today as well, around infrastructure, building out landing zones, building out, so your developers don't have to think about it, so they can do the right thing. Building out patterns for, maybe a database and some of those other innovative services around there, so your developers consume those patterns in a safe way. But one of the mechanism that we're going to really concentrate on today is the mechanisms for competence. We want to build both of those things so we can empower our developers. And this one here is something that we built in partner with NAB around building a university inside of NAB. And this is the NAB Cloud Guild that Paul Silver's going to talk about. So imagine being able to go in your organization, and maybe as a developer, you do architecture in term 1 and then a security course in term 2. But you couple that with a sense of community. You couple that with a sense of we're all in this together. So you're building out, you're sharing your learnings regularly. You're building out, you've got a community of practice inside there. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce Paul Silver up on stage, and he's going to talk about how they did this at the National Australia Bank. So, Paul?
Thanks, Arden.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Arden. So my name's Paul Silver. I work for the National Australia Bank, and NAB for short. So I'm just going to talk about number of employees. So you can see on the diagram up there, we've got 30,000 employees. And that's a really, really important number to remember, because I'll keep mentioning that as we go through the presentation. We've got about 9 million customers worldwide, and we're across about 900 locations geographically. So back in November 2017, our board of directors decided that we're going to take a cloud-first strategy. So what that meant is we don't want to look after data centers anymore. We actually want to invest our time, energy, and effort in getting customer outcome. And it was really important that we use cloud technology to enable us to do this. So technology is really, really the focal point for us to drive this. So back in November 2017, we went to the market and we went to go and hire 2,000 cloud engineers. So does anyone know the size of Melbourne? So we've got about 5 million people in Melbourne. We just can't find those resources. They're just not out there. And also we're battling against other enterprises as well for the same resources. So we just could not find the people. So we had to think of it differently. And this is how the NAB Cloud Guild formed. So I'm actually going to take you on my journey. So this is what happened back in July 2017. So I was actually a DevOps engineer, and I was working in an application and cloud platforms team. And I was going to pockets of the organization in order for us to drive out to get into cloud correctly. And what I was finding was that as we were driving in towards cloud, everyone was doing it differently, and everyone was doing it not great, especially with cost optimization. We were actually doing really badly with shutting stuff down. So I thought we could do better. So I came up with an idea with Arden that we'd come up with a 12-week course that I'd run over lunchtime. And those 12 weeks was an hour session each week. And we talk about specifics. So for example, one week would be about S3, another week would be EC2. And at the end of those 12 weeks, the idea was that we'd go off and get people certified. So remember, we had 30,000 people in the organization. Look at how many people were actually certified back then. So we took some analysis and stats. We only had 7 people out of 30,000 people who were certified in our organization. So now let's skip forward a little bit. So let's go to August 2017. We found that people were really excited about given the opportunity to actually learn. And so these classrooms that we were doing at lunches, they started to scale every day. And all of a sudden, before I knew it, I was actually teaching classes every day over lunchtimes, which was great. So we had rooms of 24 people over the 12 weeks. We got about 150 people through, but I just couldn't scale. I'd actually hit my limits. Let's push forward now to November 2017. So in November 2017, we changed things ever so slightly inside of the organization. Does anyone know what a community of practice is? No? Yes? A few people? Awesome. So for those of you who don't know what a community of practice is, it's where people want to talk about a certain subject matter. In this case, we were talking about AWS, and we already had a community of practice. But the problem was that we had AWS coming in and talking about the latest and greatest technologies. Now, we're a bank. We won't be able to use those for many, many months, and we've got to do our due diligence on every single service we consume. So it was really, really good to find this, but we had that frustration component that we actually couldn't consume them. So we changed a couple of things here. The first thing we did was we moved the community of practice to lunchtime. And what that did is it freed up people so that more people can actually attend. It's a very, very simple thing to do, but it just worked really well, because usually you've got your meetings during the day, and you just couldn't commit the time to come to the community of practice. The second thing we did as well was we actually, instead of getting AWS to give an idea of their latest technology, we actually put our guys in lights. So we said, if you've got something that you're really excited about, come and present and show the rest of the organization. So for example, if you're doing an AWS Lambda pipeline and you wanted to show how good it was and how quickly you could scale into production, come and demonstrate it. And we started that sharing community. And it's really, really important to actually start having that in your organization. Now let's skip forward. So we've pretty much gone 9 months since we started this little lunchtime learning. And we've got about 150 people trained. And you can see we've done all right. We've doubled the number of people who got certified. We've gone from 7 to 15. So it's still not great, right? For an organization of 30,000, that's still not many. What also happened in March 2018, we had a new CTO called Packeer who came in, and he said, we need to train down our organization in mass. So if you think about the flow coming up from the bottom up, everyone's really excited to start to learn. We've now got the top down are actually saying we need to do this at scale. At NAB, we have this policy called back the bold. And what you can do inside of NAB is you can say, I want to own that. So I put my hand up and I said, I want to own the ability to drive out cloud education for a whole organization. And they said, well, come up with a business case. And how many people do I need to train? I've got an organization of 30,000. So I'm actually going to talk about Capital One. Has everyone heard of Capital One? So anyone heard of Jonathan Allen? Well, he's just over there. So Jonathan Allen actually came up with this in Capital One before us, and there's some really, really good blogs that he's written about this. And what they found was that you can, if you send a lot of people at the same time, and you train them all at once, then you can actually get changes in language in your organization. So I took the similar model, so I took 10% of our organization, and I put a business case together for the 10%. So 10% of 30,000 is 3,000 people. And the best way to explain how it happened, once we trained the 3,000 people, is think about a lake, and you take a pebble, and you drop a pebble in that lake, and that pebble splashes, that's your 10%. The ripple effect afterwards, everyone then starts talking the same language, and it happened for NAB as well. So that was March 2018. We now go to April 2018. So I put my hand up and said, I want to own it. And I had 2 weeks before we actually launched the NAB Cloud Guild. So we spun up a website internally to find out how many people were interested. And within 24 hours, you can see we had 1,900 people registered interest that they want to go and get AWS trained and certified. Within 48 hours, we had the 3,000. In fact, I had a hell of a lot more. So that launched just last year, so April 27th, we actually launched NAB Cloud Guild. So far, we've probably trained about 4,200 people in the organization, which has had the effect of a conversation change. So we've actually changed the language in the organization. So right now, you're in a 200 level education session. If you think about NAB, basically a year ago, I would say we were at a 100 level organization. And what I mean by that is we were you can't organization. You can't do this. You can't actually move to cloud. After we trained all of those people, we went to a 200 organization. So we're now on a how do we move to cloud organization. And since then, we're actually moving forwards to become a doing organization. So we're actually moving assets en masse to actually get into AWS. So we've now got 450 people certified within a year. So remember, just this time last year, we had 15, sorry. In fact, I just had a look before I came on. We were actually 506. So it's been a really, really good outcome for us. So let's talk about what we've learned. So we're pretty much sending 24 people a week on an education course. What we've found, of those 24 people, 12 people will get certified. So we're getting about a 50% success rate. Now, the reason that people are not actually getting certified is if they don't book the exam. So if this is something that you guys want to go off and do, get them to book the exam directly after finishing the course, and then you'll get much better outcomes from it. The other thing we found is that not everyone wants to learn through a classroom. So we also use AWS quite heavily in their training online as well. The other thing we learned too is this is not just a technology migration. The business need to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and how quickly we can actually scale our outcomes. So obviously it's been a massive success for us. And one of the things I've actually learned on the journey personally with working with AWS is one of their leadership principles, which is customer obsession. So it's really rubbed off and made an effect on myself as well. So I'm so focused now on making sure that my customer meets what they need. So we do that with feedback loops all of the time to make sure we're actually adhering to what we need. So from an actual talent perspective, we've now got 7% of all people certified in Australia and New Zealand in AWS now work at NAB. That's pretty remarkable. Just last year we had 15 people, and now we've got 7% of people who are certified now work at NAB. Other organisations obviously are interested in how we've done it, and we're expanding this as well. So we're actually driving this out to the executives as well, and also from universities up. So we're going to have the flow from universities directly into the organisation. From a hiring perspective, I go to meetups quite often. And as a bank, when you go to meetups and you say we're hiring, it's almost like a laugh. I don't want to work for a bank. That's ridiculous. And I had that an awful lot until we started the guild. Once we started the guild, now if I say NAB's hiring, I put my hand up, I've got 15, 16 people come over and want to have a conversation about the technology we're using. We may not hire them all, but they've got a real interest in what NAB's doing. It's been great. So from a talent and acquisition perspective, we've really lifted our game by having the guild. From a developer perspective, we've actually had a lot more increase in our GitHub repo commits. And the reason that is we've gone from being a vendor perspective to now actually owning the code and driving outcomes. The number of accounts we've created and the experimentation accounts has also increased. Really, really important to be able to experiment with this technology. So we have that enabled inside of NAB as well. And from a satisfaction rating, our employees are really, really happy that they now, for the first time, have been able to actually go and get training inside of our organization. So it's been really great. Some of the lessons we have learned is it's okay to fail. Fail fast, learn from it, move forwards. The great thing about this technology is you can iterate very quickly and you can do minimum viable products very quickly. And that's how we started off at the beginning. Again, feedback loops are really, really important. We actually have surveys on every single course. So after every single course we do, we want to make sure, again, the customer obsession, we want to make sure we're meeting our customers' requirements. And celebrate success and wins. You can see I'm wearing a T-shirt today, which is labeled between NAB and AWS. So we give these T-shirts out to only those people who are certified. It's a really, really simple idea, but it makes a really good environment inside of NAB. And we tell everyone just to wear it on a Friday. And people start conversations, say, how do I get one of those T-shirts? Again, the organic growth starts happening internally. The other things we do is we celebrate anyone who's certified as well. We put them in lights because it's hard. You've still got your day job and you've still got your work, your life at home. So it is hard. We understand that. So we really want to celebrate those successes. Just talking about evangelists, Packeer evangelists. So for me, an evangelist has two skills. So the first skill is they actually want to learn this technology and they actually want to change the way we're doing things inside of NAB. If they've got that skill and they've got the skill that they can go back and train their teams with the new technology they've learned, then they're the evangelists you need to back. And if you think about the 10% model, we actually took that and put it into small teams. So let's say you have a team of 10 people. You back the evangelist who you think is going to make the best outcome, and you put them in first. You take the one person, and what happens is they go back to that team, and they start training them internally. And then when you eventually catch up with the other 9, they've already got a start on where they were before. So that's been really, really successful for us. And obviously, the other thing is really think big. Put your hand up and own it, because that's exactly what happened in NAB. So that's what we've done, and so that's our story so far. I'm going to pass on to Elly, who's going to wrap up.
Paul. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Paul. I never get tired of hearing that story about the National Australia Bank and what they've achieved. So just a couple of things, a couple of takeaways for you as we wrap up today. One is that if you're interested in building a university within your organisation like the NAB did, at AWS we've built a program called the AWS Skills Guild. If you're looking to bring your people along with you on a journey and transform the culture within your organisation through a broad training program, this is something that might be of help to you. I encourage you to reach out to your account team if you want to get more information about that. If you're an individual and you want to start getting training, I encourage you to go to our website, aws.training. That's where our digital training platform is as well. Also, come down to the Expo Centre. We've got a booth there, and you can chat with any of a few of our experts that we have there. There's people like me as well who can, if you're not looking to build a guild, but you do want a training program for your team or your people, we have people that can help building a learning program for you as well. So we can work on a customized training program for you, for your organisation.
Ooh, careful.
So I thank you so much for your time. We look forward to receiving your feedback. Thanks a lot.